She was abused every day for being too weak to work, until a lonely rancher took her home. The wind came early that morning, creeping like an old dog to the dry grass and cracking fence boards that lined the edge of a forgotten little town called Dustmere. It carried with it the scent of horses, old tobacco, and something sharper, something like silence. A girl walked slowly through the middle of that silence, slender, quiet, pale in a way that wasn't just skin deep. Her steps were careful, like she was walking through a world that hadn't made room for her. Clara Mae. Folks knew her name, but rarely said it. To them, she was that sickly girl, the lazy one, the burden. Names like barn flies, buzzing and biting, and then gone. She held a tin bucket that had seen more patches than metal. Her fingers, knotted with old bruises, struggled to grip the handle, but she didn't complain. She never did. The road from the shack she lived into the town's well was half a mile of dirt and judgment. Her cousin sometimes spat on it, said maybe she'd get strong if she walked it twice. Her uncle laughed when they said it. Every day she made that walk, not because she wanted water, but because that's where she could pretend, for just a moment, that someone might see her. The well was old stone, crooked and leaning like it had grown tired of standing. Clara lowered the bucket with steady hands. The rope creaked like an old man's bones. Behind her, the general store screen door slammed, and Boots stepped out. Someone muttered about her blocking the road. Another told her to hurry up. She didn't turn around. She didn't flinch. She had learned that flinching gave them something. It had been like this since the fever, the one that came for her bones when she was 13 and never truly left. It had hollowed her out, left her ribs like piano keys and her joints stubborn as frozen hinges. Her body healed just enough to keep going, but never enough to work. And so, in the eyes of her kin, she was broken. Broken things don't eat first, don't rest, don't matter. She dragged the filled bucket back toward the shack, spilling more water than she kept. Her uncle would notice. He always noticed. Last time, he pressed the back of her head into the stove. Not hard enough to scar, just hard enough to remind her. She touched the place on her scalp now, absently, as if her fingertips could erase the memory. The shack stood on the edge of town, like a barn someone forgot to finish. One window had no glass, just a rusted frame that shivered when the wind got bold. The door hung crooked, and inside the air was always damp, like the walls themselves were sighing. Inside, the boys played cards and laughed with mouths full of someone else's bread. Her uncle sat by the fire, boots off, oiling a rifle he never used. When she entered, they didn't look up. When she set the bucket down, one of the boys knocked it over with a lazy kick. She knelt and tried to say what spilled. Her uncle didn't speak, just leaned forward and slapped the side of her head. No words, no reason, just the sound of skin meeting skin and the silence afterward. That silence was what always stung the most. Clara had a voice once, a soft thing, curious and warm. She used to talk about healing herbs and the animals she dreamed of caring for. She'd tell stories to her younger cousins until her aunt died and the stories dried up, until the work got harder and her lungs got smaller, until she learned that silence was safer. On Sundays, she walked to town early just to sit outside the chapel. She never went inside, her clothes too thin, her presence too unwelcome, but she liked the sound of the hymns through the window. That's where she saw him again. The stranger. He stood near the trading post, always around the same time. He never spoke, didn't smile. His hat cast shadows over eyes that seemed made of river stone. His coat was worn but clean, and his boots spoke of distance. There was something in the way he watched, not like the others who saw her as a stain or a warning, but like he was looking for something he recognized in her, and maybe found it. She noticed he never pushed through crowds. He waited, quiet, observing. One morning, he handed the shopkeeper a coin just before Clara reached for her bread. When she tried to pay, the man behind the counter waved her off. She didn't look back at the stranger, but she knew it was him. A few days later, she found a carved wooden sparrow on the bench she swept each morning. Nothing grand, just a small, careful thing, smooth with oil, shaped with patience. She ran her fingers over its wings, and for a moment, it felt like she held something living. That night, she whispered to the sparrow, told her name, her age, her dreams. She wept, not loudly, just enough to remember how. The next morning, her uncle noticed a sparrow in her apron pocket. He snatched it, snapped it in half, and tossed it into the stove. No words, just that same silence. Like even her smallest joys didn't deserve to exist. One of the cousins laughed. The others spit at her feet. They said she had a secret lover, and maybe he'd like to share. She left the house before her stomach could betray her. By the time she reached the trading post, her body was shaking. Not from fear. She was used to that. From something else. Like the air had gotten thinner. The stranger was there, his horse tethered nearby, pawing the dirt. She wanted to speak. Just once. Say thank you. Ask his name. Tell him. He carved the bird just right. But the words curled up and died before they reached her throat. She turned to go. But then she tripped. One moment standing, the next on the ground, palm scraped, chin split. The bucket clattered to the side. The whole town square seemed to pause. Then laughter, the cruel kind. One of the boys jeered. The shopkeeper chuckled. A woman nearby whispered to another, she should stay home if she can't walk upright. And still no one moved, except him. The stranger stepped forward, slow, steady. He didn't reach for her like someone rescuing a damsel. He crouched beside her like a man watching a sunrise, quiet and reverent. His voice, when it came, was soft as a lullaby. You all right, miss? She didn't answer. He didn't push. Instead, he picked up her bucket, refilled it from the post barrel, and placed it gently beside her. Then he tipped his hat, turned, and left. Not a word more. She sat there a long time after he disappeared. Long enough for the sun to start crawling down the sky. Long enough to feel the cool touch of the bucket's handle, warmed slightly by his hands. That night, she walked home slower than usual, but lighter. Her uncle noticed. He asked her why she looked different. She lied, said nothing. But when she closed her eyes, she saw a man with riverstone eyes and hands that carved sparrows. And for the first time in a very long while, she fell asleep without fear, not because the world was kind, but because maybe somewhere in it, someone was. The land out past Dustmere was a kind of silence few could stand. It rolled for miles, stitched together by fences that never stayed straight, and skies too wide for most men's hearts. It wasn't just quiet out there. It was a kind of stillness that made you hear your own regrets clearer than anything else. Eli Granger lived alone on that land, not out of pride or stubbornness, though folks in town figured otherwise. He just found that most people spoke to fill the air, and Eli had no use for noise. He rose with the sun, fed the horses, mended fences, and sat by the hearth come nightfall. He wrote sometimes, just a sentence or two on the edge of a feed sack or an old receipt. Words like wind and ash and forgiveness. Words he never showed anyone. He wasn't old, not yet, maybe mid-30s, give or take. But the desert had a way of aging you from inside. His eyes were not tired, but they were done hoping. He'd loved once, a long time ago, a woman with black curls and a laugh like music in a wooden house. She died fast. Fever, just like that. No time for goodbyes or grief to find its shape. After she passed, Eli didn't rage or fall apart. He just got quieter, like someone who'd gone underground to wait out a storm. He kept to himself after that, not because the world was cruel. He already knew that, but because the moments of beauty were too few, and he didn't trust himself not to hope again. So he stopped looking. He kept his eyes on the ground, on hoof prints and fence posts, until Clara Mae. He first noticed her not as a woman, but as a presence, like mist around the edge of something burning. She was always where others weren't looking, stooped, silent, too thin for the load she carried. But she walked with rhythm that didn't ask for pity. She simply existed. And in a town that fed on judgment, that in itself was defiance. He'd seen her at the well, the post office, the edge of the chapel, always alone, always watching the ground like it held something sacred. People didn't speak to her unless they meant a harm. That much he gathered fast. So Eli began leaving things behind. A coin at the shop counter, A wooden bird carved from scrap pine. A single apple left at the bottom of a basket she thought was empty, not out of pity. Pity was noisy and heavy-handed. He did it because she reminded him of something true, something still. And true things deserve to be tended, not rescued. He timed his errands to match hers. Rode in at a slower pace when she was near. Left without a word. Never looked too long, never stayed too close. Some flowers bloom only when no one's watching. The townsfolk noticed, but they didn't speak of it. Eli Granger was too quiet to mock and too steady to question. They called him the Ghost Rider sometimes, the man who showed up when no one else would. He didn't care what they thought. He was watching a seed tremble just before it broke open. One day he saw her stumble, watched the whole thing from his saddle, heart pulling tight. Her fall wasn't dramatic, but it felt like the earth itself had sighed. He didn't rush. Rushing would have startled her. He stepped down, lifted the bucket, and knelt beside her like the moment demanded reverence. When he asked if she was all right, it was not a question. It was a promise. She didn't answer, but she didn't flinch either. He considered that silence sacred. After that day, something shifted. Not in the world. Dustmere kept on with its cruelty, but in him, he found himself thinking of her hands, all bones and scars, of how she stood up after that fall, not fast but proud, of the way her eyes never begged. Then came the morning he saw her collapse. He had gone into town for nails and salt. His cart creaked beneath the weight of supplies. He didn't expect to see her out so early, but there she was, a bundle of wood in her arms, thinner than ever, moving like someone walking underwater. She made it 5 steps before her knees gave out. The wood scattered, her body folded like wet paper. People watched. No one moved. Eli did. He dropped the reins and crossed the street in 3 strides. Her uncle stood nearby, arms crossed, face smug. "She's just putting on a show," he said. "Girl's always been dramatic." Eli didn't answer. He crouched, helped Clara sit up slowly. She was conscious, but dim like a lantern running low. Her lip was split. Her hands were shaking. Her uncle stepped forward. "She's mine to deal with. Granger, ain't your business." That's where Eli did something rare. He looked the man in the eyes. "This ain't the life she owes you," he said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The words dropped heavy, like stones in a dry well. Her uncle scoffed, spat near Eli's boots, and turned away. Eli stayed with Clara until her breath came back steady. He helped her stand, asked her if she wanted to go with him. She didn't speak, just nodded. He offered no explanations. Hitched the wagon, helped her climb up slow. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't need to. The road home was long, the sun dipping behind them like a promise. Neither spoke. The horses trotted gently, dust rising in gold clouds behind their wheels. He watched her from the corner of his eye, how she clutched her arms, how her shoulders rose each time he shifted beside her. He made space, gave her silence, the kind that didn't press. When the ranch came into view, she leaned forward. It wasn't grand, just a single-story house with a porch and a barn leaning a little too far west, a chicken coop, 3 horses grazing, a garden patch with more weeds and vegetables. But to Clara, it looked like a place where nothing would reach for her in anger. He showed her the room with the wide window, set a basin of water by her bed, left without saying much, let her rest. He stayed on the porch long into nightfall, listening to the wind move through the high grass. He lit no lantern, just sat there listening. Inside, Clara slept for the first time in years without flinching in her dreams. Outside, Eli whispered a sentence to the stars. "I'll speak when she's ready to hear me." And until then, he would be the silence she could trust. The morning after she arrived at the ranch came slowly, draped in soft clouds and the smell of damp earth. Clara woke to birdsong, not the high-pitched clamor of town sparrows, but something lower, sweeter. A mourning dove, maybe. Its call curled through the open window, along with the scent of hay and coffee. She stirred beneath the quilt, startled by how firm and clean the mattress felt. The room was spare, just a small wooden bed, a washstand, and a shelf lined with worn paperbacks and tiny bottles of herbs. But to her, it felt like stepping into someone else's dream, a peaceful one. There were no sounds of boots stomping or doors slamming, no voices rising in cruelty, only wind, steady and warm, moving the curtain like breath. She sat up slowly. Her legs ached. Her palms were still sore from falling, but her body felt less like a burden and more like something real. She looked down at her hands resting on her lap. Not lovely, not strong, but hers. She touched the windowsill. A daisy sat in a chipped mug. It hadn't been there the night before. She dressed quietly, found her shoes near the door. When she stepped outside, the ranch unfolded before her like a long-forgotten storybook. Grass rippled under the hooves of 3 chestnut horses. A fence stretched into the horizon, bent in places but strong. The barn leaned tiredly to one side, half shadowed by a row of poplars. Somewhere, water trickled from a distant creek. Eli stood near the porch, hammering a loose board into place. He didn't look up right away, but he knew she was there. "Sleep all right?" She nodded. He gestured toward the porch steps. "Coffee's hot." She sat. The mug he handed her was heavy, the rim chipped, but the warmth settled deep in her chest. For a while, neither of them said anything. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It felt lived in, like it had been waiting for them both. He didn't ask about her uncle or the town or the years she spent breaking quietly under other people's weight. He only asked if she'd ever worked with horses. She shook her head. He smiled, just barely. "I think they'll like you." That day, he taught her to hold a halter. Not all at once, just small things. How to keep her hands steady. How to let the horse see her before she moved. She listened, not for instruction, but for the tone of his voice. Low even, no sharpness. He spoke like someone who didn't expect answers, just understanding. The mare, a pale sorrel named Maple, sniffed Clara's hand and snorted softly. When Clara flinched, Eli didn't correct her. He just waited. She tried again. This time, Maple didn't pull away. Days passed. Clara learned how to sweep the barn, how to mend a tear in a saddle strap, how to boil potatoes without burning the pot. She started humming again. Not always. Just small things. Half melodies that drifted through her lips while she fed chickens or rinsed linens. At night, she sat on the porch with Eli, watching the moon lift over the hills. Sometimes he carved. Sometimes he just listened. She spoke more now. Stories about her mother's cooking, about how she used to read medical books under the table when no one was looking. She told him about the fever, how it made her legs ache and her lungs catch, how no one believed her pain was real. He never asked why she stayed so long. He seemed to understand that asking would reopen wounds still learning how to close. One evening, he handed her a wrapped parcel. Inside was a journal. The pages were empty, lined in faded blue. A pencil tied to the spine with string. "For your thoughts," he said, "or whatever else needs letting out." She didn't cry, but her voice caught when she whispered, "Thank you." He nodded, didn't look her in the eye. Kindness, for him, was always given with averted gaze. She started writing the next morning. Nothing elaborate, just small things. "Maple likes apples more than oats. Eli hums when he sharpens his knife. I woke up not scared." Healing, she learned, was not a moment. It was a series of unnoticed days. Then came the storm. A dry wind had been building for days. The air felt heavy, the kind that made horses restless and birds vanish early. Eli double-checked the barn, tied down loose boards, covered the chicken coop with canvas. When the rain finally came, it came hard, like the sky had been holding its breath too long. Lightning cracked open the dark. Clara stood by the window, watching the trees bow like dancers in pain. Eli knocked once, opened the door. Barn roof's leaking. "I'll need to keep an eye on the hay." "I'll come," she said. He paused. "You don't have to." "I want to." They crossed the yard together, lanterns swinging between them. Rain soaked them quick. Inside the barn, the smell of damp straw and wet fur filled the air. Maple neighed, unsettled. Eli moved quietly between the stalls, checking ropes and latches. Clara followed, steadying where she could. A gust tore the door open. Eli turned fast, his bad leg slipping slightly. He caught himself, but Clara noticed the grimace. "You're limping," she said. "Old wound. Comes and goes." She didn't press, but when they returned to the house, she brought him a towel and a mug of broth. He took both, sat by the fire. She knelt beside him, not out of submission, but something gentler. He watched the flames. She watched him. "Tell me something true," she said. He didn't look at her, just whispered, "You remind me of her." She waited. "My wife," not in looks or voice, in stillness. He didn't say more. She didn't need more. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at her window, writing in the dark. Stillness is not silence. It's the space between heartbeats where healing begins. The next morning, Eli wasn't at breakfast. She found him near the edge of the paddock, trying to coax a skittish filly from the mud. His leg buckled. He fell hard, his breath knocked out. She ran. Not fast, not graceful, but she ran. By the time she reached him, his face was pale. He tried to stand, waved her off. She ignored him, helped him lean against the fence. Went inside, found a clean rag, hot water, tinctures, bandages. She worked like someone remembering a past life. Her hands were steady, her voice quiet but certain. "You're not as indestructible as you act." He chuckled, then winced. She wrapped his knee, propped it with a pillow, brought him bread and tea, sat beside him until his breathing evened. When he finally looked at her, there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Gratitude, yes, but also recognition. He saw her not as someone fragile, but as someone whole. That night, she placed a new entry in her journal. "Today, I remembered who I was before the bruises. And someone else did, too." The wind settled. The stars came out. And for the first time in her life, Clara didn't feel like she owed anyone an apology just for being alive. Summer lingered longer that year, stretching its golden fingers deep into September. The wind had softened, the skies held a gentler blue, and the mornings arrived with dew resting on the porch rail like a secret. Life on the ranch began to find a rhythm, and Clara fit inside it like a breath long held and finally exhaled. Each day brought small victories. A freshly mended saddle strap, bread that rose just right, laughter that stayed in the air longer than it used to. Her hands were no less bony, her strength still limited, but her eyes had changed. They no longer searched the ground. They looked forward, sometimes even upward. She had begun planting tiny beds of wildflowers near the fence, seeds tucked into the soil with careful fingers, their names whispered like promises. Eli watched from a distance, never intruding. He knew blooming took time. Then came the knock. It was late morning, the sun pinned high above the stable roof, when Clara heard it. She opened the front door and found herself face to face with the past. Harvey. He looked just as she remembered. Pressed shirt, eyes always half-lidded with disdain, mouth drawn tight like he was holding in some clever insult. But now, he held a different kind of expression. The town had spoken, surely. Whispers carried like wildfire. Eli Granger had taken in the sick girl. People always talked when they didn't understand. Clara stood still, hand on the doorframe. "Well, ain't this a surprise?" Harvey drawled. "Heard you'd run off. Figured you'd be halfway to dead by now." She didn't answer. The silence between them stretched like a taut rope. Harvey leaned against the post, arrogant and easy. "You don't belong out here. You know that. This isn't your kind of life. You think this man's going to save you? You're still sick, Clara. Still broken." Behind her, the floor creaked. Eli stood just within the threshold, arms folded, saying nothing. Clara turned slightly, her voice quiet but unwavering. "I'm not broken. Not anymore." Harvey scoffed. "You really believe that?" She stepped forward then, not aggressive, not loud, just steady. "You didn't leave because I was sick. You left because I didn't fit your idea of useful. I was never less than. You were just too small to see the whole of me." His face reddened, the veneer of charm thinning. He stepped forward. Eli's boot struck the wood once. "That's far enough." Harvey glared at him, but said nothing. He turned to Clara once more. You'll regret this. You don't belong to him. You belong with your own. Her voice, calm as wind through wheat. I don't belong to anyone. And with that, she shut the door. The house fell into silence. Not tense, just full. Clara leaned against the door, eyes closed. Eli stood beside her, saying nothing. He didn't need to. She'd already said everything that mattered. That night, the barn burned. The fire came suddenly, red and hungry. Clara awoke to the smell of smoke, the sound of frantic hooves. Eli was already moving, shirt half buttoned, eyes sharp. It was Maple's stall that had caught first. Clara saw it even through the smoke. A broken lantern on the ground. Not an accident. Eli ran ahead, but his leg betrayed him halfway to the barn. He stumbled, gritted his teeth. Wave her off. Stay back. But she didn't. She grabbed a pail, filled it from the trough, dashed into the smoke without thinking. Inside, the heat swelled like a living thing. Horses kicked and screamed. She threw the stall doors open one by one, shouting, guiding, coughing. Her arms burned, her throat clawed with ash. She found Maple last, trapped behind a half-fallen beam. She pulled with what little strength she had, teeth clenched, heart pounding like thunder. Somehow the beam gave. The mare bolted free into smoke. Clara staggered, vision blurring, heat pressing her down like judgment. Her knees buckled just outside the barn door, breath coming in gasps. Then coolness, hands under her arms. Eli, dragging her toward the creek. They collapsed beside the water, coughing, choking alive. He pulled her into his arms, trembling. You're a fool, he whispered. She laughed weakly, voice hoarse. So are you? They stayed there as the sky lightened with dawn. The barn hissed and smoldered behind them, but the horses were safe. So were they. Later, when the ashes cooled and the sun climbed higher, Eli found her sitting by the flower beds, her face streaked with soot, hair damp, eyes glowing. He walked to her slowly, sat beside her without a word. For a while, they just watched the wind move through the grass. You're not who you were, he said. She smiled faintly. Neither are you. He took her hand then, deliberate, slow. No assumptions, just warmth. She didn't pull away. You've given me more than a home, she said. You gave me back to myself. He looked at her, something unspoken blooming behind his gaze. You gave me a reason to speak again. They sat in silence as the world turned golden around them. A pair of birds dipped across the sky. The air smelled like smoke and wildflowers. Later that evening, she placed one last note in her journal. We are not what the fire took. We are what we built after. And then she tucked the journal into a wooden box, sealed it with twine, and slid it beneath the floorboard of her new room, for some future girl to find, should she ever forget her worth. To anyone who had been called weak, useless, or broken, she would say, there will be those who try to erase your softness. Let them try. The truth is, wildflowers grow best in scorched soil, and love does not ask you to be stronger. It only asks you to be seen. Out past the fence, the wild horses ran free, and in the house with windows now flung wide, Clara smiled. Not because her story had ended, but because it had finally begun. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new upload.